Hi, I'm JC Hallman, and this is the Anarcha Archive. Today, we're looking at how I found Anarcha's grave after years of searching in the middle of a remote forest in Virginia.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
As I said in an earlier video, I got stuck in the search for Anarcha at about 1864. I knew that she had been leased to a man named Charles Mason, and a letter from Mason to James T. White offered a few details about what her life was like. But I didn't know who Charles Mason was. My search in Virginia had started in Caroline County, but there weren't any Charles Masons in Caroline County.
That brought me to the probate office of King George County, Virginia. It's not much from the outside, but a lot of the secrets of Anarcha's life were waiting in there.
Charles Mason, I learned, had a large plantation called Alto, somewhere near King George. That is, somewhere very close to where I was standing when I first found these documents.
But where? Everyone I met in King George told me that the person to ask was a woman named Elizabeth Lee, who was the main force behind King George's tiny historical society.
But for a while, as I was conducting this part of the search, I was still staying in Bowling Green, which is about 20 miles away. I got a phone number for Elizabeth Lee and an email address, and I reached out to her, but she never answered me. I'd been told that she was working on a book of her own, and I worried that she wasn't answering because she was afraid that we were in competition. I waited until I ran out of other ways to try to find Anarcha. Then I went back to King George. I had to find Elizabeth Lee.
And so I came here, the King George Historical Society. I thought it was going to be tough, but this is the South. I met a very nice woman here, and when I said I was looking for Elizabeth Lee, she gave me her address.
This is Elizabeth Lee. She died a few years after she first helped me in 2017. The truth is, I never would have found Anarcha without her help. And I shouldn't have been worried when she didn't answer my emails and phone calls. She was 80 years old even then, and didn't have much use for voicemail and email. She answered the door when I knocked, and when I explained why I was there, she got ready, and we drove right back up to the Historical Society. We sat down, and I started to tell her the story of Sims in Alabama, the fistula experiments, and the young woman known as Anarcha. Elizabeth perked up in her chair when I said that name. She rose, it was a bit of an effort, and she pulled a book down from a shelf. This is the page she turned to. There was an Anarcha and Lorenzi Jackson buried on land nearby, land that had once been inside the Alto plantation, owned by Charles Mason. This is what happened. A hunter named Jim Petrie had been out in the woods behind his home. A few hundred yards into a quite impenetrable forest, he found a gravestone, all by itself, not part of any graveyard, broken off and lying face down. It was partially covered over with dirt and leaves. As it happened, Petrie was an amateur genealogist. He wrote down what was written on the stone, and he brought it to Elizabeth Lee. When Lee heard the name Anarcha, she connected it to this entry, Anarcha. If you're coming to this video cold, you might be wondering why the names are so different. It might be a good idea to go back and look at a few earlier videos where we talked about how Anarcha's name changed over time, but even now, we see Anarcha's name in different forms. In 1870, she's Anarchy, married to Lorenzo, also in King George. I didn't find this until much later, but this is Anarcha's death record. As we noted in an earlier video, in Virginia, Anarcha was known as Anki, and here she is, Anki Jackson, wife of Lorenzo Jackson. It turns out that Elizabeth Lee had transcribed this record for another book, but she had never connected it to the Anarcha in her cemetery book. It took a while to figure all these things out, but this was the first thing that Elizabeth and I did. After she pulled down her cemetery book, we hopped into my car and drove out to the Alto plantation to find Jim Petrie.
It took some time to find Jim, but eventually it led here. It all looks pretty normal from the outside. But inside, just a few steps away, it all felt very wild and far away. In the coming years, I would visit Anarcha's grave on 5 or 6 occasions, and either going out or coming in, I would get lost every time. So by the time I got here, I had been looking for Anarcha for several years. And there was still a lot of work to verify that this was her. And you've seen some of that work. But it all felt very close at this time. And what I was thinking was that history is hard, the truth is hard, but it's out there. You can find it. The graves just in this little area. Drop-offs all around it. It had fallen over. You can see where it broke off there. And when Jim found the grave, he tipped it up against this tree. And I thought about a lot of things here. Thought about the truth, thought about the past, thought about the sacrifice that Anarcha made. And it was a satisfying feeling, but it was also a feeling of obligation because I still had a lot of work to do to confirm her story and then ultimately to write the story. So this wasn't really the end of the telling of the story of Anarcha. Finding this grave felt like the beginning.
Next time, we'll look at what can be said about Anarcha's final years.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.